It says, I'm just going to read a portion of it. The gentleman who is writing this is a Baptist minister. He says, I am a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I feel responsible and obligated to the community to respond to the teachings of Johnny Robertson on Cable 6. I disagree with his interpretation of the Bible on a lot of issues. Now, Johnny, does it seem odd that these people would come out and say that you're wrong in the paper but not face you in the Cable 6 studios?
Well, you know, Kip, that was my exact take on that first portion, because in case people who are listening today don't realize it, we have offered, not only on Cable 6, but while we've been on the air for the last 4 years, we've offered free airtime for anyone who disagreed with us. We've been glad to allow them half of the program, different format, whatever, to come in and answer, what we're saying. And my thought, when I read that, where he says responsible and obligated, my thought was, Paul said in Philippians 1:17 that he was set for the defense of the gospel, and in Acts 17:2, it was his actual, he said his manner was to go wherever he got a chance and to reason with them about what he was teaching. So I can't understand why, I'm going to say Mr. Hughes, even though he calls himself Reverend, Mr. Hughes doesn't take us up on that offer.
And in fact, Johnny, in the first part of his paragraph, which he writes an extremely long letter, he goes on to say, I would like to share with the community from the Word of God how a person gets saved. Mr. Robertson believes that a person is not fully saved until he or she gets baptized. Therefore, if you believe that, then he is baptizing unbelievers. He also believes that your sins are washed away by water baptism. Mr. Robertson believes that you can lose your salvation. I mean, does this seem like semantics? Does this seem like somebody just trying to take you down a notch, Johnny?
Well, that's kind of odd that particular thing came up on that particular day, Kip, because on Channel 19, Charles Stanley, I don't know if you see that or not, he's a Baptist preacher out of Atlanta, Georgia. He came on Sunday also and was discussing these same things, and a lady called me in the morning, AM hours of the morning, and asked me, she wouldn't give me her name or anything, but she said, you need to turn on Channel 19 and they'll tell you whatever. Well, I did, and this coming Wednesday, we're going to answer both Mr. Hughes and Charles Stanley and show, I think, Kip, that it will just floor all of the people who are watching our program and are wondering who's telling the truth. Because as in this account and on the one on television on Channel 19, they contradict themselves coming and going. And it is sort of a semantical thing. But I'm pretty prepared, to even after this article, to give Mr. Hughes time. Somebody's already called him, and he didn't want to do it.
Does that surprise you that perhaps you're not able to answer a letter in the bulletin? This is all in response to a letter from S.M. Spencer, who says in her last paragraph, I know that Johnny has brought the truth. Do you feel like this is kind of a war being waged with letters back and forth rather than people standing up for their own positions?
Yeah, and I would say, though, that it's characteristic of what we've seen, not just in this area, but every area. It's not to their advantage. I know this from history. It's not to their advantage, to meet us publicly, because if they do, their position is going to be made, it's going to show that it'll fall. And so this is really the only other alternative they have until they finally do meet us publicly. And I'll tell you this, Kip, someone will finally, because of their own people, their people are going to get tired of me saying that we can't be answered, and they're finally going to prop one of these Baptist preachers up and, encourage them to get the courage to defend them. And when that happens, that's when we're going to see a lot of people come out of the Baptist church.
Now, Johnny, just for clarification's sake, you are issuing an open invitation to any other minister of any faith whatsoever. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, that would be Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, Buddhism, Taoism, anything at all. You're going to give them free airtime.
That's right. What we would do is the format, just so that someone would know, is we would basically take, say, 5 minutes. That person would make a detailed argument in 5 minutes on a particular position, say like water baptism. Mm-hmm. We would then go 5 minutes to answer them, because if you go much longer than that, you even yourself, you said this was a kind of a lengthy letter. Sometimes people get lost in all the rhetoric, and if we'll keep it down, and I'm not saying that's all it would be is 10 minutes. It would actually be the whole hour if the person wanted to, but we would do it in 5-minute sections.
right, Johnny. Well, again, if people want to get in contact with you, a phone number they can reach you at?
I can be reached at 632-385.
And may not have claim to the building on Starling Avenue that he ministers from. We'll provide those for you later on in the evening.
Buddhists, don't you know what Buddhists say about Christianity? They down Christianity because there is so much division. They say, how could Jesus be divine and cause all this division? You know what Jesus said about himself in John 17:21? He said the very thing that will make him, the people know he's divine, is the fact that he will bring unity to the world.
Which Buddhist said that, Johnny?
I'm saying Buddhist people say that.
Which Buddhist people?
I've talked to Buddhist people besides you, Kip. I'm saying Eastern religions generally reject Christianity because of the division.
You know, I will remember a saying that I heard for a long time, that Christians don't make Buddhists, but Christ would have made a good Buddhist.
Well, that's maybe something somebody says, but it's grandmother.
Johnny, you have to pay your bills, I have to pay mine.
Right.
And the scene last night, again, the Hagees, who have both their morning breakthrough and evening breakthrough show on Cable 6 for their part, continue to appear daily on our station and say that they intend to be here for quite a long time. Again, you heard Johnny Robertson say that it was his goal, and it is Christ's goal, to remove all denominations. Cable 6 will have a special report coming up later on this evening on documents that have been provided to the station saying that Johnny Robertson may not have claim to the building on Starling Avenue that he ministers from. We'll provide those for you later on in the evening. But one church was celebrating. It's McCabe Memorial Baptist 12th of 1999. And it says, Dear brethren, most of you are already aware of the division that occurred at the Collinsville Church of Christ in April of this year. The eldership here terminated the service.
Okay, folks, we appreciate you for being with us. I am Johnny Robertson. We are live tonight on What Does the Bible Say? We introduce you to our program tonight by letting you see the level of hits that we take. This was around the 2000 time frame, and I want you to realize something. What happens with the Church of Christ is when we have an issue come up, say a division, instead of us going to the station and saying, well, really, I don't know that we would have had a choice one way or the other. We were just a single hour on this broadcast station, and we were pretty much very vocal when we moved to this station. And I think that it was just kind of a general all-around thought process. Okay, this person that's come over here that's kind of vocal and aggressive, and I'll not say a lot of the things that you all have said about me. When we did have some individuals that brought up some issues that we had amongst ourselves, the television station decided to just go with this, and they started taking documents that were being presented by individuals who are opposing the Church of Christ on Starling Avenue. This is the third night that it went straight, where people were allowed to hear every single detail that was being provided. They were allowed to hear hour after hour of individuals call in and give all kinds of different things about us. One lady called in and said that anybody who wore makeup was a Jezebel, and I said that from the pulpit. Just started getting all kinds of stuff. These are the kind of hits that we take. And this is not the only hit, and if y'all don't mind, I'd like to give you a demonstration of what was going on at the exact same time. We're going to zoom our camera in on some documents that I brought with me tonight, and I want to show you that what should I do?
Probably just have to hold on.
Just go ahead and pick it up. Okay. All right. Now, what this represents, I'm just going to let it fall, and we're going to roll it. Okay. All right. It's upside down at this point, so we're going to end up having to turn it over again because half of them the other direction. These are articles that began to unfold both from the paper that was up here as well as the Martinsville Bulletin all at the same time. So basically you can see what we're going to end up unfurling in front of you is about 90 newspaper articles in a 6-month period. Nearly every denomination in town ends up getting into a discussion in the newspaper trying to answer or bring information that would try to answer, defame, diminish, whatever you want to say. So basically the Church of Christ was taking hits from the station that we were on, from the very media source, Kip there, Scott Coleman, Charles, whomever will happen to be the talk show host. Here's the Martinsville Bulletin. We estimated, all right, now let's switch. And you start unrolling and I'll start rolling. Here we go. We got a little glitch there. We had to turn it upside down. And every media outlet, was there any media outlet that wasn't? Bill White wasn't in on the fray. So Bill White actually is a person who was a member of the Church of Christ himself at one time. He learned the truth in college. And so I don't think he was doing anything, saying anything one way or the other at that particular time. May not even have noticed what was going on. But we're basically showing you here, we estimated if we had bought this that we would have been somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000, closer to $10,000 is my estimate that it would have covered. And what we're showing you here is all the whining and the crying and the carrying on that goes on because I talk about one particular group or one particular media station or a particular church like Jackie Poe or the Baptist or whatever, folks. What is, is your doctrine fragile? You see, the Church of Christ actually increases. It becomes more popular. It becomes more, and then we have a couple down here in the floor that we don't want to leave out Charles's headlines. I don't know what all they say. Let's see, there's one starting there, Robertson versus Robertson. Huh. Johnny's back. I guess I came back from the Marshall Islands, and then I know that maybe that's me leaving to go to the Marshall Islands. I'm not sure. But anyway, this is what we're saying. We're saying, am I still talking? Yeah. We are saying that all of these individuals are showing conflict within the Church of Christ. They are trying to write about us in a flurry since the negative attention was going on in 1999 when we moved from Collinsville to Martinsville. All of the attention, negative attention, and it looked like a good time to throw a lot of spotlights on anything that we said or did, maybe to diminish us. But you know what? That's fine. Because when you have the truth flourishes, the truth shines regardless of the situation. Jesus' disciples multiplied the greatest when the leader, Jesus himself, died. When he allowed himself to be taken by his enemies and demonstrate the true power that was in him and his word, then his truth, the persons who adhered to his truth, they saw the true power and victory that's in the truth. Folks, this didn't hurt us at all. And to just give you a contrary side of that, let me see if I can come down off of this and move up to this right here. Now, here is an instance where individuals who also had difficulties shortly thereafter.
Freedom Baptist Church, and he is here today to talk to us about the situation that developed there over the weekend. We have been looking forward to a chance to answer some of the questions that we've had from the public, and we hope to get that done today. And Carl, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Unfortunately, we wish we were under better circumstances.
Well, anyway, first of all, we're hoping to come out Sunday morning, but didn't. I guess Pastor Tim just couldn't do this in front of everyone, and so he did write a letter, and Sister Heather also wrote a letter, and they said that I could read these letters that I did read to the...
Now, if you remember this, then you also remember it was very quick, and it went I would say if there was 1 hour of media coverage from this station where they bought airtime, I'd be surprised if there was even an hour given to it. It was basically...
Cable 6 will...
It was basically a Carl Keith read the letter, Charles and them reported on it. and it was kind of hush-hush. I was forbidden to speak on it. I'll say this. They basically told me that you're going to cause yourself to lose face. You're going to cause the Cable 18 group to be upset with you. But folks, there is no way I was going to be quiet about that, because I had too much back and forth with Tim Whitehart, and too many people were telling me Tim Whitehart was a man of God and I was a dog. And all this time I was telling you the truth, and for a great portion of the time that I was involved in back and forth with Tim Whitehart, he was actually having an affair with the flute player. And the person who he was having an affair with, as far as I know, she wasn't named all over the county like Tim was, and so it's kind of a different set of standards for two different individuals. And so my point is this: here is an instance in which we had a split. We're not hiding our split. We'll tell you in a heartbeat why we split. And I'm going to answer some of the reasoning that Kip gives as he talks to a lady who was not an authorized spokesman for the Church of Christ, but she called in and, just as a new member, did a pretty good job of affirming what it is that we say. So what I'm trying to say is, folks, why all of the sympathy and the whining and the crying when I point out what is going on all around us? When the least slip-up, at least seeming slip-up, comes in regard to the Church of Christ, we get 3 solid nights of an hour and a half, 2 hours of constant persons weighing in, trying to diminish the Church of Christ, 6 months of battle in the newspaper, and we didn't complain at all. Matter of fact, it didn't bother us at all. It did not hurt us one bit. As a matter of fact, as I say, whatever happens to the Lord's church has already promised. His church cannot even be affected by the gates of hell. That's what he told Peter in Matthew chapter 16, verse 19. Or 18. Not even the gates of hell shall prevail against the Church of Christ. It's always going to be in the pages here. Even if it were to go into hiding, Jesus has said in Matthew chapter 24 that His Word would never pass away. Heaven and earth may pass away, but His Word's not going to pass away. Well, if the Church of Christ is in His Word, and it is, then guess what? Even if you don't see the Church of Christ in your town in existence, in other words, persons are not there meeting and representing the Lord's church, it's here in seed form. And you could find it very easily if you were a student of the New Testament. You're going to find it. You're going to find the Lord's church, the Church of Christ, the Church of God, which is the same thing, said to be bought by His blood. And so tonight we're going to let you hear some of this and let you realize that there is a double standard out here. I even received, I actually received some, I don't know if you might call it, what would you say, censorship in regard to the press that I put on some of the persons that are not even associated with this station. Because, you know what? Truth is a very, very powerful tool. And it arrests, it causes to rise many great foes. The truth has many foes, and the truth has to be defended. The Apostle Paul said, I am set for the defense of the gospel. Philippians chapter 1, verse 17. I hear all these people talking about all the time, well, the gospel don't have to be defended. Ignorance. That's just ignorance of God's Word. Paul said, I am set for the defense of the gospel. Jude 3, he said, I was going to write to you of the common salvation, but I found it needful rather to tell you to earnestly contend for the faith once delivered. Jude 3, earnestly contend. That's what I do. I contend for the faith. Some of you folks don't like it. You say, oh, you're mean, you're ugly, you're nasty. And when you say that I'm mean, ugly, and nasty, all you're doing is judging me. So you're mean, ugly, and nasty right back. See how that goes, folks? It's not ugly, mean, and nasty. To defend the faith and to contend for the faith, it is actually biblically right, because the faith has many enemies. The truth has many enemies. Now, I'm not saying Kip necessarily was an enemy. Kip was a person who was uninformed. He's looking at us. He admitted he was watching our TV program. I hope he's still watching our TV program. I really like Kip. I have very much enjoyed the fact that Kip didn't wear his feelings on his sleeve, and you could go back and forth with him. And Scott Coleman as well. Individuals went back and forth with Scott Coleman. So then the newspaper took it up. And as we say, it was a huge issue around here, and we did not complain. It did not hurt us one bit. As a matter of fact, as I'm going to show tonight, this is the way the Church of Christ flourishes the most. And as a result of these things, many of you are studying the things that we teach, and you're going to hear some of these things tonight. So let's continue to listen to a few of the things that were said, that Kip said, and that were said about us. Take a listen.
I have a special report coming up later on this evening on documents that have been provided to the station saying that Johnny Robertson may not have claim to the building on Starling Avenue that he ministers from. We'll provide those for you later on in the evening. But one church was celebrating. It's McCabe Memorial Baptist 12th of 1999, and it says, "Dear brethren, most of you are already aware of the division that occurred at the Collinsville Church of Christ in April of this year. The eldership here terminated the services of Johnny Robertson as the local minister. This led a number of members to challenge the authority of the eldership, consisting at that time of Tom Mayo and Dave Robertson. The nature of the challenge was divisive and hurt the cause of Christ in this area. Another congregation was quickly started in Martinsville by those who left with Johnny. We had prayed that over time many of them would realize the sin involved in sowing discord, rather."
Okay, now, if you were around during that time frame, then I'm sure you heard about this, and it's likely that you've heard about it since. Oh, well, you used to be somewhere, and Bob Lawson says you used to be somewhere, so what? You know what the Bible says? Any person who has everybody speaking well of them, you need to watch that person. Now, folks, the gentleman who was in front of me, who was the preacher before me, everybody loved him in town. Nobody said anything bad about him. Charles said he was a yes man. Well, you know what? That's what happens. That's what you have to be in order to have everybody speak well of you. He had, just take for instance, when he had his show on television, it was sponsored by Chick-fil-A. You know who owns Chick-fil-A? The Baptist Church, or a Baptist people own Chick-fil-A. There's no such thing as like a Baptist headquarters that owns it's owned by Baptist folk. It is basically known. They don't open on Sunday. It's pretty odd, isn't it? You don't have chicken on Sunday? Well, it's because they're Baptists. And now, can you imagine a Baptist group, individuals that are very strong Baptists, and they got this restaurant chain all over the United States, and here I am pointing out that Baptist church is not in the book? They're not going to support me very long. Well, why did they support Tim Shoulder so long? Because Tim did not arrest their thinking and challenge them to realize they are lost. And as a result of the way I preach, I actually ended up having to challenge the individuals who claim to be in the leadership position in the church in Collinsville. And as a result, those people didn't leave with me. Those people left on their own. The two men who claimed to be the leaders of that congregation actually fired me on the day that I was going to take my vacation. I preached a sermon. I was going to leave for my vacation the next day. They gave me a letter at the noon service that said, "You're fired, and if you say anything about it, we will not give you your 90-day termination pay." And I got up in the pulpit that night and read the letter to the congregation and said, "See, these are the kind of guys we're dealing with. They are breaking their agreement with me. They're trying to keep me quiet, and they're breaking their agreement with me. Here's what I do. I do not bow down to that kind of stuff." You know why? Because the truth is not afraid of that kind of stuff. The truth's always going to prevail. So basically, I was prepared to go on back to the Marshall Islands, where I had told them I was going anyway. See, we never came to stay here. My agreement with the Collinsville Church of Christ was I would be here 2 years, and at that point, after my daughter was out of high school, we were going to be leaving to go back to the Marshall Islands at the end of 1998. They begged us, and I have it on tape, to stay in 1999, early 1999, and then I began to question the persons who were in leadership because they wouldn't do what the Bible says in April, and they fired me. That's no big deal. It's a matter of record. As a matter of fact, who made it a matter of record? They did. They sent in some of these individuals that tried to cause me trouble, sent in these documents to Channel 6 in those days, and thought it would hinder us. Didn't hinder us. They've had several preachers since then, 3 or 4, because they can't get along. I've been associated with Martinsville for 10 years. James Oldfield has been there 10 years. We've been the same guys all along. We have never fallen out of disassociation with the Martinsville congregation. We've had different preachers that work with us there. We're still in association with those. Steve is still in the congregation in Dallas-Fort Worth that still pays part of my salary. Norm Fields is still on my website. If you look, send me an email, you'll still see Bible Q&A down there at the bottom as a link on my website. So you see, folks, this did not hurt us. But listen to some of the things that are being said.
And in dividing the Lord's church and be led to repent and return, only one member has chosen at this time to do so. Regrettably, we feel it is necessary to inform the churches in the area that we are not in fellowship with those who left and are meeting at the Martinsville building of the Church of Christ.
Now, let me just give you the information here so you won't be thinking that there's any kind of cloud over there. The building that we occupy now has always been associated with the Church of Christ. The members there over the years stopped being evangelistic, just like the people at Collinsville, just like the people out on Oak Level, just like the people out at Figsboro, and just like the people out at on Old Chatham Road and over in Nordan in Danville. They keep the truth inside the walls. They're ashamed to tell you that your church is not in the Bible and that you're lost. They think that's going to offend you. And they think somewhere or other that they're going to be able to befriend you and make you feel good or make you think that they're so wonderful that you're going to come in, leave the man-made church you're in and come into the man-made church. That's what you'll think. Because see, most people think the Church of Christ is a man-made church unless you tell them the real truth about the church. See, I don't want anybody to come to the Church of Christ because they like me. Because see, that's coming for the wrong reason. You'll be converted to the servant rather than the Savior. So you can go ahead and think about me any way you want to as long as you think about Jesus. I'm teaching Jesus' Word. You're not converted to me. You're converted to the Savior. You're not converted to the servants. We will let you down. We try very hard to do what's right, and we will take correction and instruction. And that's what we were doing in Collinsville. I was having to correct the leadership over there because they were refusing to stand up against marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Some of the difficult things, people going to the beach, stripping down almost naked. And folks, if you wear a two-piece bathing suit, you're almost naked. If you wear a one-piece bathing suit, you're almost naked from the hips down. I don't want to see that much of your hips, or the front either. And it's all designed to get people to look at you. Why don't you just run around in your panties and slip? You see, it's just ridiculous, the things that people call covered. And they didn't want to stand up against that stuff. They didn't want to hear the conflict. They didn't want to hear me talk about the prom and stuff like that. Did Tim Shoulders preach against that? No. That's why I had so much trouble when I followed him, is because I had to come in and preach against those things, and it made me look different than him. It made me unloving and unkind. When in reality, I'm the one who is loving and kind, because I'm going to tell you the things that are going to get you hurt that you don't need to do. So, the building over at 823 Starling Avenue, the people who had occupied it formerly quit evangelizing. And guess what they did? They died. That's what happens to the Church of Christ when it doesn't evangelize. You know why? The Church of Christ doesn't operate like the rest of y'all. We don't entertain. We don't do all of the fun, run, and all that kind of stuff. I'm responsible for the entertainment of my children, not the Lord's money. We entertain our own children in our own homes, and Christian people gather together, and we do it out of our own pocket. That's why you don't see us getting on these big buses and all that stuff and going to New York and all over the place using up the Lord's money on stuff that really is the responsibility of the membership to their own family. So y'all have got a club going, and most of the time it's the elite members who can put in some, and the rest of you don't get to go. In nearly all of these churches, you only have about 100 of the individuals that really get to participate in the big fun. The rest of you are on the fringe, wishing you can get up there, being told if you'll be more faithful, God will bless you more. You're never going to get in, because these things are not designed to include everybody. It's always a select few. In the Church of Christ, we don't do that stuff. And so if we don't evangelize, we die. Because evangelization is the key to the Lord's church. Jesus did not come down to the world to feed it, clothe it, to have fun and run. Jesus came, Luke 19:10, to seek and to save the lost. You want to get a purpose in your life? Folks, you won't get a purpose on a Harley Davidson. See, that's why Jackie Poe and them and all these other folks has got Harleys. They got one out there, Lorenzo Hall, he's got a Harley group now. Mike Penn will be having a Harley before long. All these folks got the Harley runs and all that. See, they're missing something on the inside. And so they have to build you up with that kind of stuff, more bands and all that kind of stuff. In the Church of Christ, you want to have a purpose? Our purpose is to evangelize the world. That's what Jesus came for. Seek, save the lost. in the Church of Christ, if you don't evangelize, the church dies. Because that is the very core, the spirit, the life of the Church of Christ. So the church at 823 out Starling Avenue, it died. They refused to evangelize. I met the last member as his wife was passing from this earth. And I heard her tell her husband, make him promise her that he would do something with that property and get himself and her 2 sons into a congregation where the truth was being preached. Well, he wanted to give me the property. I wouldn't take it. You know why? Because I didn't want my name to be slandered. I knew that there's the possibility. You see, we use biblical principles. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, the Apostle Paul, he wouldn't even carry the money, because it could be the case that somebody might try to say something about him if he did. So they had selected individuals to carry all the money that he had gathered for the poor folk over in Jerusalem during that famine time. So I said, no, take the deed over. If you have some specifications, you all have some specifications. The last living members, if you have some specifications, make them known. Make the leadership, the elders, bishops, pastors, all the same men, make them agree to that in order, as a stipulation, to get the property. In the deed it said that ultimately Johnny Robertson will come over here and plant a congregation, because that's what he's good at. He was doing it overseas before he came. He plans to go back overseas, but before he goes back overseas, let him plant the congregation, another congregation at 823 Starling Avenue, and get that work going again. They signed their name on the dotted line. Shortly thereafter, they contacted a realtor and tried to sell the property. And so that was some of the stuff that was going on. Then they fired me as a result of standing up against them on some other issues. Well, when the membership found out that their leaders weren't what they were supposed to be, they basically said, you know what? Whether Johnny stays or goes, we're moving. And they simply, orderly, and lawfully took possession, as the law says you have to do. They followed exactly how the things are set up in our commonwealth here, and they took possession of the property over there. Left a third of the individuals over at Collinsville, about 30 of them, 13 of which were actually related to the leadership. End of the story. And we've never been fighting them since. But because, you see, we left them behind because they wouldn't do what the Bible says. Now, they can always change. They can always correct that. They can always stand on the truth, and we can always get back in fellowship. But what they decided to do, some of them decided to send information up here to Channel 6 at the time and see if they couldn't hurt us. But see, you cannot hurt persons who are involved in the truth. That didn't bother us. I didn't even respond to it back in those days. When these letters came out, my Wednesday night program, I got on the set over there, same set, and I put up a picture of Hitler. And I said, if somebody said that I'm Hitler, do you think I'm going to bother with that? You know I'm not Hitler. I'm not Hitler reincarnate, and I'm not the Hitler that they never did find. I don't have to respond to that. And I said, this is not true. There's no evidence of any of this. Let's just say so. If they had any real evidence that I'd done anything wrong, they could have done something about it. And so basically, the only time that I talk about it is in a setting like this, where I demonstrate that these kinds of things do not hurt you when you're involved in the truth. As a matter of fact, with Freedom Baptist Church, there wasn't any real reason to make everybody hush-hush about what was going on. What they should have done is just come right out in the open with it, and they should have treated Tim Whitehart differently. But as we have told you folks, when you sin in these other churches, you have to leave town. And that's what these folks over at Collinsville tried to get me to do. I hadn't sinned. I stood up against them. They wanted me to move 100 miles away. What in the world? I basically was headed back to the Marshall Islands, 10,000 miles away. And the brethren who left over there said, we're leaving anyway, and we would like to make a go of it. You can come and preach. Okay. I'm not scared of a little division when you do it right. 1 Corinthians 11, the Apostle Paul says, there needs to be a choosing here so that the right way might be approved. Division is not ungodly when individuals in the midst are doing something wrong. It's a command. You have to divide when one portion is actually doing something wrong. Now, that's what happened. What happened as a result of this? Well, let me just look down through here at a couple of things that I might want to let you listen to as we go through this. We'll move to about 10 minutes into this, and we'll let you hear. Now, last night you heard the guy who called in and said that he was a Baptist and he had burned all his Bibles. He believed what I believe. and he was really mad. He judged me. He said he was judging. He finally got his Bible right. We'll go ahead and let him play again.
We do, however, continue to pray for individuals.
I'd be interested in knowing how many people, and didn't he tell you last night that they are not a church?
He said they are not a denomination.
Well, I think they're a cult.
Are you surprised at some of the things that he says?
Yes, I am. I really am. I don't think he should be on cable 6.
Do you think that they are hurtful things?
Yes, I do.
Now, this lady calls us a cult, and she's hurt. He says hurtful and offensive things, and then she turns around and calls me a cult. Can you get worse than that? Can you get worse than calling a cult? All that does is bounce right off of us. See, when you've got the truth, it doesn't matter what people called you. They called Jesus a devil. Said he's got a demon. He's a devil. That stuff doesn't hurt us. And she said she would be interested to know about the growth of the church. Now, folks, I am happy to let you know about the way the Church of Christ operates, and let you know too, the Church of Christ takes hits. It has taken hits from every direction. The station here spent nights on end talking about us, constantly talks about us. Every host up here takes calls on a regular basis. If I start calling in, or people start calling in and start talking about one of the other churches in the area, they hush that stuff up. And let me let you know about this, let you guys know about the contract. In the contract that you sign now, it says you can't talk about any person on this station. You're under contract. You can't talk about any other religious person on this station. You know what that is? That's not on account of me. That's to protect you. Because what happened in the Jackie Poe days was, when I came on the broadcast station, I started pointing out the errors of all these different churches. And guess what? They all jumped off. All the Pentecostals took off over there and started BTW. So they engineered a contract which protects you all. You cannot say my name, because if you ever say my name, then that opens up the door. I can actually say something about you, and you're going to diminish if you get into a one-on-one with me, with the Church of Christ and the truth. So we now have contracts that won't allow me to mention your name unless you mention me first. Now, I can mention Baptists. I mean, there's just no way that they could censor us to that degree. I just can't mention a particular Baptist. Now, I'm grandfathered in on Freedom Baptist. Freedom Baptist has been talking about me since the very beginning. So we're in the grandfather clause there, even though they're on this broadcast. I happen to like Tim Whitehart, and I happen to like Chip Coleman. We disagree. I look forward to a time when Chip and I may have a discussion, and either TV or private, and he's already said that that day may come. Now, Tim and I were having studies. I like Tim Whitehart. I had agreement with Tim Whitehart on some things. One of the things we agreed upon is the great danger involved in the Pentecostal charismatic movement, which elevates your feelings above what does the Bible say. But see, folks, when you have the truth, you can take hits from every direction, whether it's the Martinsville Bulletin, whether it's Bob Lawson, whether it's the Buzz, or whether it's the station that you're on, or all the people in town. It doesn't hurt you. How do we grow during those time frames? Well, folks, let me give you just a little bit of history, if I may. And when we do history, I just love doing history from your history books. Because see, when I do history from your history books, it always helps me to convince you of the truth, because it comes out of your book instead of from our mouth. How about this one? A History of the Baptists by Robert G. Torbett. Now, folks, this is a very well-known history of the Baptist churches, and it is very broadly and widely quoted. On page, let's move ahead. Let me see here. I'm going to have to look on the inside of mine, because I usually put my notes in there as to where things are located. On page 275, you're seeing here on the screen, on page 275 in Torbett's history, he lists the growth that we had in the 1800s as a result of the constant conflict that was going on with the denominations that were around. Now, some people try to say that the Church of Christ started around this time. Not so. I have Robert Semple's history with me too, which is also a very, very widely known and quoted Baptist history. It's the oldest one known of for Virginia. I suppose it's one of the oldest ones for the United States. Robert Semple was reporting in 1770. He was writing about churches of Christ that were in association with other individuals that were calling themselves Baptists. They were all coming out of the Congregational Church at that time, and some of them were going all the way back to the Bible and calling themselves Christians in the Church of Christ and trying to practice free will, not saying they were born in sin, and eventually they all split up. But they were meeting once a year during these days, in the early days of the struggles in Virginia when we were beginning this country. Now, on page 275 in Torbert's history, Baptist history, it says, in Kentucky, where the controversy took the greatest toll among Baptists, about 9,580 members were lost between 1829 and 1831. How does that grab you? You see, there was great conflict. Individuals in the Baptist church were discussing, just like you are. I've debated Baptists around here, Southern Baptists, Independent Baptists, Primitive Baptists, Pentecostals too, but more Baptists than anything. And as a result of Baptists reading their Bible and really getting in there and saying, you know what, we complain about the Methodists. Now, I want you to get this argument, folks. This lady called in and was talking to Micah tonight. It's a very nice discussion. And she said, well, the Bible didn't say not to play mechanical music. Well, let me just run this by some of you. I don't even know if she's a Baptist or not. But notice this. Baptists generally will be honest when you bring up good arguments because, see, they use the same argumentation we do. They just don't open their eyes on the same subject. If you use an argument in one area, when you start using it in another area or it's used against you in another area, you have to be honest. Watch this. The Baptists have always said, listen, the New Testament says that baptism is immersion. Okay, it does. In other words, God specifies what He wants you to do when water is applied. He specifies. What does He specify? That you're immersed. Baptism is an immersion. Is an immersion. Let me enunciate so you can hear what I'm saying. It is an immersion. Baptists tell Methodists, baptism is an immersion. God specifies immersion. Well, the Methodists say, well, God didn't say not to sprinkle. Well, the Baptists say, listen, we don't go by what God didn't say, we go by what God did say. God said immersion is, baptism is immersion. When you're baptized, you're immersed. And they go to passages like Acts chapter 8, verse 37, where the Ethiopian eunuch and Philip in verse 39 both went down in the water and he baptized him. It's a burial, Romans chapter 6 verse 4. See how that argument goes? But see, when we talk about mechanical music, we go to Ephesians 5:19 and we say, God specified sing. Speaking to yourselves, psalms, hymns, spiritual song, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Now, singing is what God specified. But then the Baptists come back and say, well, God didn't say not to play. Well, why don't you let the Baptists sprinkle? It's the exact same argument. The Baptists want to sprinkle. Don't tell me sprinkling's not in the Old Testament. They sprinkled in the Old Testament. See, you go back to David and say, well, David had mechanical music. Why don't you let the Methodists go back to David? They sprinkled back there. They sprinkled water over them at different times, sprinkled blood over them at different times, sprinkling in the Old Testament. But see, we're not under the Old Testament, at least when we're talking about baptism, we're not. But once we want to talk about music, praise, worship to God, they want to go all over the Bible to get stuff. So basically, these arguments were being made by great men like Alexander Campbell, Walter Scott, and other persons like him. And as a result, 9,000, now this is Baptist history, folks, this is the Baptist. In Kentucky, 9,580 members were lost in 1829 to 1831. Now, I say people were more honest and spent more time reading the Bible in those days than they do now. It's harder to get people to obey the gospel than it was in those days because we all know back there they didn't have TV, they didn't have movie, they didn't have all these cars to run up and down the road and keep them busy and keep their flesh occupied. They had a whole lot of time to reflect upon matters that were serious, and their lives were brief. They didn't live nearly as long, and it was a time where people were very serious about life. And as a result, in this time frame, look at that, nearly 10,000 people obeyed the gospel in a 3 to 4 year period. We're growing around here too. We're very excited about the fact that individuals, gentleman called in, a very well-known person in the political arena over in Danville called in tonight and told Micah he's so thankful that we've come into this area. He didn't even know the Church of Christ existed until he started listening to my broadcast in 2004. Well, hello. James Oldfield, actually he said that to James Oldfield. James Oldfield then took that opportunity to criticize the rest of the churches of Christ around here. And it was a great opportunity. Here's a man who's in his 60s, never heard of the Church of Christ until I started broadcasting in Reedsville in 2004. That is a crying shame, and it reflects on the other churches of Christ around here who all say we're hurting the reputation of the Church of Christ because we're so bold and aggressive. It's not hurting the church. It's making y'all look bad. You ought to be ashamed of yourself for being ashamed of the gospel. I would be ashamed to be ashamed of the gospel. I would be ashamed to be ashamed of the Church of Christ. And you all ought to be ashamed for going around and telling people that you don't, members of the Church of Christ now, going around telling people that they don't like the way Johnny preaches. He makes people angry. Guess what? Jesus made people angry, folks. But I know angry people, agitated people, aggravated people, guess what they do? They open their Bible and they call into Kip and they try to answer me. Or they call into me. The one thing that is missing is their preachers. Their preachers are silent as a tomb. So this lady asked Kip, I'd like to know how the Church of Christ grows. Well, there's 10,000 of them back there. Here's another Baptist history. This Baptist history I've used a lot. It's called A History of the Middle District Association of Virginia. I was going up the other day, as many of you know, to talk to some folks in the ACLU in Richmond the other day, and I went through one of these areas, right through several of these areas, as I was driving up. In this particular history on page, I don't have this one up. I have it on my computer, but I didn't take time to get it tonight. I believe it's on page, let's see. I usually have that page marked for myself, but I don't see that I did. It actually is here it is. It is a section where it talks about a new majority. Chapter 4, page 37. That doesn't really look like it. Let me see here. It's actually a time of opposition, and I'll show this to anyone who would like to see this. This is the area. It actually talks about whole organizations, whole sections of this particular, the Middle District. This is page 39. The Middle District also declined to seat fraternal delegates from the Marian Association because of the prevalence of Campbellism and opposition to benevolent institutions. Now, in those days, because Alexander Campbell was a main spokesman or such a very strong arguer, many of the persons called the Church of Christ Campbellism. But it goes on to tell about the fact that about 16 or 18 churches turned into Churches of Christ. That's Baptist history. So we do quite well in controversy. It doesn't bother us at all. And you know what you ought to remember too is when you say things like, he has been offensive and hurtful in some of his statements to us, yet the lady called us a cult. Well, you know, when you say that he's been hurtful and then you turn around and call us a cult, what in the world? You know, what does that say? Now here is another history. This is actually put out by the Presbyterians because, you know, it could be the case that the Presbyterians don't necessarily believe the Baptist history. So this is the Presbyterian history of the church in Kentucky. It says, such was the zeal of the Such was the zeal of the proclaimers that they swept over Virginia, Kentucky, and the western countries like a torrent. Whole churches, both the Baptist and Methodist, occasionally declaring for them, and their progress has been ever onward ever since, swelling in less than 20 years to a number of 150,000 members and upwards. Now that's the history of the Presbyterian Church in Kentucky by Robert Davidson. That's how we do in controversy. So what I'm trying to say to you is this didn't bother us at all. And what it does, and ma'am, I am sorry that you're offended. I don't want to offend anybody, truly, but I do want you to be saved. And if it takes offending you, agitating and aggravate, you know, in your washing machine, you got a stage there where it says agitate. You know what you do? When you want something to get clean and you're having a hard time getting clean, you put it on agitate. Isn't that right? On your washing machine, ladies? See, sometimes we have to aggravate and agitate you to get you to read. And as a result, we end up getting people to start reading the Bible. Let's take a listen to some of the things that were said.
Okay, well, thank you.
I've been offended by several things he has said. I'm Baptist, and I know one night he made the statement that you might as well be in McDonald's as in a Baptist church.
Okay.
And I took offense at that. And I just wonder, since he is the only true church in the city or county, how many new members has he gotten since he started that church out there? I'd be interested in knowing how many people have switched it.
Did you hear, ma'am, how many Baptist churches have turned into churches of Christ over the years? And you look around you here in Martinsville and Henry County, and if you're listening over in Rockingham County and Caswell County, Pennsylvania County, anytime you see a Christian church or disciples of Christ, that used to be us too. We were all together in the 1800s when people were coming out of the Baptists and the Presbyterians and Episcopalians in droves, a torrent, as the Presbyterians called it, sweeping over Kentucky and the Western Reserve and Virginia like a torrent. In those days, we were all together, and the Christian church and the disciples of Christ brought the piano back in. They ended up wanting to go backwards, started calling their preachers pastors and having one-man rule again in societies and bake sales and all that kind of stuff again. And so as a testimony of how big we used to be, how prosperous it used to be, how many churches were made in this conflict, how many members of the church were, or how many members increased, look around you. And ask somebody who's in the disciples of Christ in the Christian church, and ask them if they were not all teaching the same thing in the early 1800s when the Church of Christ was increasing by 10,000 in 3 years in just 2 states area. That's not to mention the area like Oklahoma and Texas. The Church of Christ exploded in Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, and Oklahoma. So, folks, this is not some little cult. Jackie Poe, the Church of God he's in, doesn't have as many members as the Church of Christ, and he's wanting to talk about a little cult over there. Do you know anybody that's been a president that was in the Church of God? There have been presidents that are members of the Church of Christ, and persons who used to be still associated with the Church of Christ throughout history. James A. Garfield, one of the presidents who was assassinated right after Lincoln was assassinated, member of the Church of Christ. As a matter of fact, just to give you an idea of members of the Church of Christ, that's James A. Garfield right there on the left. Also, just to give you an idea of the individuals that are members of the church or have been members of the church that you knew and just didn't realize. One of the most well-read authors in the United States, Max Lucado, is a renegade from the Church of Christ, was a very well-known preacher, did mission work for the Churches of Christ in foreign fields, I believe, and now he's basically, like many of the churches of Christ in this area, he's ashamed of the gospel, doesn't want to take the time that it takes to answer the hard questions and constantly deal with the conflict from the many denominations around us. And so he basically let down his guard and began to make the same arguments that the Christian church makes, and he sounds like a Baptist now or a Presbyterian, and he's about like Billy Graham. He doesn't too much believe anything. But as you look down through this list, you see anybody that you know? Individuals in our more, I would say more along the lines of our lifetime: Dwight Yoakam, Randy Travis, Glenn Campbell, Roy Orbison, Weird Al Yankovic, a singer named Brandy, Pat Boone, Janis Joplin, Kenneth Starr, the gentleman who was prosecuting Bill Clinton, Jeffrey Dahmer. He's a pretty famous person. We don't claim Jeffrey Dahmer before when he was killing everybody, but he obeyed the gospel in prison. That's good enough. Now, some of you folks, if you do something and you obey the gospel, you're still going to be held against you. He was a mass murderer. There's no doubt about that. I don't know what religion he was in when he was mass murdering, but he obeyed the gospel in prison. And we just continue on down here. Meatloaf, persons that I recognize: Loretta Lynn, Don Williams, Sonny James, Amy Grant, Waylon Jennings, Ray Walker. Ray Walker was backup singer for Elvis Presley, Elvis Presley's stepmother. David Robinson, NBA player for the San Antonio Spurs. Gene Stallings, Alabama football coach. Bill Bates, Dallas Cowboys. On and on and on we can go with these individuals that you may recognize. A.M. Burton, founder of Life Casualty Insurance Company. Kitty Wells, old-time country western singer. Ronnie Dunn, singer for Brooks and Dunn. Holly Dunn, country singer. Pat Sajak, Wheel of Fortune. Pat Sajak actually divorced his wife, took off with somebody else, so he's not a faithful member of the church. As we said, Dee Presley, Elvis Presley's stepmother. Elvis Presley was buried, and his sermon was preached by an individual that I knew in Memphis, Tennessee, Scott Hamilton, U.S. figure skater. Is Scott Hamilton have some bad rep these days? I'm thinking so too, but at one point he was a member of the church. Joel Osteen's wife was raised as a member of the Church of Christ. And folks, it's difficult to be a member of the Church of Christ. We have a lot of people who go off and they never come back because it's difficult to be on the guard, defending the truth all the time. The devil is always out there and he's always fighting you. The Church of Christ is a very, very, very well-known biblical institution that has constantly grown throughout the ages. And if you think that it's something that is recognized only in the United States, I suggest that you get in touch with me and I'll run you copies off of this book from 1647 that lists the churches of Christ were doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. In 1647, they were in London, England, and yes, they were involved in controversy. They were in a debate with somebody in Parliament named Daniel Featley. He was trying his best to defeat them. They called them Anabaptists, and anytime a Baptist tells you that a person who is an Anabaptist is one of their cousins, you tell them to prove it. Just because they were called Anabaptists by their enemies doesn't mean that's what they called them. In this book, in 1647, these individuals called themselves Churches of Christ. They sent an answer to Daniel Featley and said, these things that you say about us and claim about us and calling us Anabaptists are false. We do baptize again because your baptism wasn't a baptism at all. But we are Churches of Christ, Christians in the Churches of Christ, and they defended themselves. Great controversy. Why? Because the devil is always trying to kill the Lord's church. Always was, trying to kill the Lord's Son and the Lord's offspring. Our God has always had His children in array against the devil's foe. So, folks like Joel Osteen's wife, and let's see, what's the other guy? Is there a... Well, I can't think of his name. He lives in Arkansas, and we play him all the time. His wife, also a member of the Church of Christ, it's like John Hagin. Is there a Hagin? Kenneth Hagin. I believe it's Kenneth Hagin. His wife was a member of the Church of Christ. So you see, folks, these people they're everywhere. Many of them are unfaithful. We have unfaithful members of the church around here. You may be from the horse pasture area, and you know a guy named Ronnie Martin. Ronnie Martin was a member of the Church of Christ, very vocal on this station. Stood up to Rodney Billings over there at BTW. Got some very interesting information from him. Not faithful. Wished he would be. Love him to death. Wish he would come back to the Lord's people. One of the ladies on this broadcast, you hear her voice, used to be a faithful member of the church and has allowed herself to decline and is no longer with us. Individuals have a hard time. The Lord, in His own parable of the sower, if you remember, the sower sowed his seed. Some fell on the pathway. Some fell on the rocky ground. Some fell on amongst the thorns. And then there was some that fell on the good ground. Well, guess which one of them remained? The good ground. 1 out of 4 in Jesus' parable remained faithful and brought forth fruit. And that's how difficult it is. And so tonight we listen to these things that's been going on. And folks, we want you to know that the controversy, it's by design. The Lord bore the church. He bought the church in the midst of controversy. He shed His blood. You have to die. He didn't lay down and say, I'm going to slit my throat or slit my wrist and my blood's going to pour out and I'm going to give myself as a sacrifice. I'm going to take my own life. No. He stood up against the era of His day, and the people who were supposed to be God's children killed Him. The church was born in controversy, and the church has grown in controversy ever since. Controversy is what causes you to pick up your Bible, because you are hearing from my broadcast that you are headed straight to hell. Let me say that. I don't know why when I whisper and I look differently that somehow or other it's supposed to change your mind about your destiny. Is there something about me whispering hell that changes the way you feel about your destiny? Folks, when I talk about hell, I talk about it like I would talk to you if you were in a burning building. Get out of the building! And you're on your way to hell. I want to shout it. I want to encourage you, to excite you, to get you to realize how urgent it is. You could die. And if you have influence and you die, your influence will die with you. Because when you die in the Baptist church, your children will say, my mama or my daddy's in the Baptist church and they died, and I'm not going to say my mom and daddy went to hell. So you see what you're doing by staying in the Baptist church? You're guaranteeing that your children will have a harder time learning the truth. If you're an old person, get out of that man-made church and find your way to the Church of Christ. See what you're doing? Your influence is going to die with you. Well, sadly, no, your influence isn't going to die with you. You know, as I think about that, your influence for good will die, but your influence for bad will remain, because your children are going to have a hard time going against mom and daddy. But some people are honest, as you'll hear tonight.